Best horror films of 2023 so far. How do you feel this year's been for horror? What's up, everybody? So I'm going to talk about the best horror films, in my opinion, that have come out so far this year. And these are horror films that have been released in 2023, either on streaming or in theaters. Keep in mind, I have not seen every single horror film that's been released this year, either on streaming or in theaters. And there's a couple of heavy hitters that could make my list. So if those are on your list and they're not on mine, it could be because I haven't seen them or I just really didn't enjoy them. And in my opinion, unfortunately, this year has kind of sucked for horror. In fact, I'm going to talk about 8 different movies, and only, even though I know this is a list of the best horror films of 2023 so far, I would only actually really strongly recommend 2, maybe 3 of them, but that's the list of the films that I've seen, the horror films that I've seen that have come out this year. I'm just counting down, and I think there's only maybe 2 or 3 really solid or fairly solid horror films. Again, I haven't seen them all, and I know everyone's going to say, hey, this should be on your list. Maybe I haven't seen it, but I've been very disappointed with horror this year, unfortunately. So let's kick off the list. Number 8 on my list is the film Influencer, which came straight to Shudder and I checked out on a whim. And I found myself really enjoying this film for the most part. It's about a influencer, social media influencer, goes on vacation to an island and meets this girl along the way. And it's sort of the story about influencers and how their lives are so polar opposite from what they portray on social media, and the loneliness of being an influencer, and also how you treat other people and the world around you. And I really liked the story. I liked the aspect, and I liked where they went with it and how they kind of showed the positives and negatives of each character in this film. I thought the main actress was really, really good in this film, and I had a good time with it. It's not like an amazing film that I'm going to like go out and say, yeah, absolutely check that out. But I did have a good time with it. I like the story being told. And it's kind of a slower film, but you know, if you have Shudder, definitely worth checking out. Number 7 is the M. Night Shyamalan film Knock at the Cabin. And while I don't think that this is a film that I'd outwardly recommend to horror fans as something that they must see, I found myself really, really enjoying this film. I actually feel like M. Night Shyamalan was trying to tell a very unique story. He felt more restrained in his storytelling, and I can see why a lot of people didn't like this film and why it didn't exactly end up being what they thought it was going to be. It's a very different film for him. And I felt like his strength in this film in particular was the character work and the message he was trying to get across. And this is a very interesting message that I think deserves some dissecting. I won't necessarily try to dissect it in this video, but on surface level, Knock at the Cabin is a very simple film. There's not a lot of twists and turns. It is explicitly what you think it's going to be. I think a lot of people were disappointed in that because they were expecting like some sort of twist and turn movie from M. Night Shyamalan, and that's not what it is. It's a character story. It's a story about different people in the world and working together and sort of understanding each other's differences and accepting them, whether you fully understand that person and why they choose to do things that they do, sort of understanding that working together as a whole is for the greater good, I guess, and getting together and getting on the same page about things is more important than being right, being wrong, and just sort of forgetting whether they are a good person or a bad person, just understanding, I guess, the greater morality and the greater good. So I think, again, this is a film that needs to be dissected further, and at surface level, like I said, it doesn't give everything away. So upon first viewing, or without thinking about it too much, I can see how people were disappointed because it didn't give them exactly what they wanted. But I urge you to maybe give it a second viewing or think about it a little further, beyond the twists, beyond the turns, beyond the literal things that are happening on camera. Look more into the character work and the development of those characters and their stories and the lessons and how they're all flawed people. And there's not really a good guy. There's not really a bad guy in this film. They're very flawed characters coming together for a very insane idea, a very insane plot. That's kind of the concept of it. Think about it, the world today and like what we're going through and how things are so insane and they're blown out of proportion. And we kind of tend to pin one side against the other or blame somebody. So if you haven't seen it and you go and watch it, try to keep that in mind. Or if you have seen it, maybe give it another watch, think about it a little further. And I think that there's a really good story in there and some great acting. And I do think that it's shot really well and the lighting is really top notch for M. Night Shyamalan. So I think it's some of his best character work. While it's not his best story or his best horror film, it's definitely worth checking out. And I actually found myself really impressed with it. Number 6 on my list is the movie Malium, which is from the same director who did The Last Shift, which some people might remember from a film that came out to streaming a few years ago. And this is one of those movies where I'm not exactly sure why it exists, because it's basically like a remake / reimagining of the same film, The Last Shift, but with a bigger budget. So I did a review on my channel, like a 2-minute review. If you are interested, go check that out. I did enjoy both films. You don't need to see The Last Shift to see Malium. It's by no means a perfect film, and it has quite a few flaws, but the aspects of that are really good. I will remember and will make me want to revisit it, and that's what makes it worth putting on this list. There's this sort of isolation aspect of this girl who is a police officer, and it's her last shift at this abandoned police station. And so you've got this really kind of interesting story being built. And there's this girl, she's got this backstory with her father, who was a police officer. And you've got the best part of this film are the isolation and the sort of rundown police station and the ghosts and the, I guess, things that she sees or experiences while she's there and what's going on and the story that's developing throughout the night as she's doing her last shift. And so that's really the strength of the film. The acting is pretty good also from the main character, and some of the practical effects work is really good also. In moments, they overuse things towards the end of the film, but it's worth seeing for that, especially if you enjoy isolation films, if you enjoy films that sort of cater around these characters who are stuck in a central location and can't leave and have to deal with something that they don't expect and sort of are over their heads. It's definitely worth checking out. It's got some creepy moments. And so while it's not an amazing film, it is a solid, entertaining film that's worth checking out if you're bored. And number 5 on my list is probably going to be a lot higher up on other people's lists, but that's Evil Dead Rise. Unfortunately, I just did not like this movie very much. It makes number 5 because it's an Evil Dead film, and it's not a bad film. It's still, you can have a good time with it. There's a lot of good practical effects. There's blood, there's gore, there's a cool atmosphere, cool setting, and it's an Evil Dead film. We get another Evil Dead film pushing this series forward. So for that reason alone, it makes number 5. And again, it's not a bad film. I can see a lot of people going to theaters and enjoying this and having a fun time with it. So I put it at number 5, but ultimately I was very disappointed in it. I just didn't like the direction they went. I think that there was a lot of things lost in translation. Being set in LA, it doesn't look like it's in LA at all. It, of course, was not shot in LA. And there's even like that moment where she's like breaking the eggs, if you've seen the film, and they're like in a cage or a container on the counter and they're not refrigerated. That's not a thing that translates well to America. I don't think people are going to understand that, but like I feel like the filmmakers didn't quite get that it's in LA and people don't put their eggs on their counter in LA. There's aspects like that in the film that I just took me out of the film, as well as not for 1 second did I think that I did not know where this film was going. I knew the characters that were going to die. I knew the characters that were going to live. And I feel like a lot of people said, oh, wow, they really like took risks with it. I don't feel like they took any risks with it. I feel like they cut, copy, pasted this film. And again, not that it's a bad film necessarily. It's just, I was not surprised by any means. I knew exactly where it was going. And the actual setting of being in an apartment complex, when I heard that it was called Evil Dead Rise and it was going to be in a high rise, I thought, hey, it's a bunch of people on multiple floors, similar to maybe Wreck. And we were going to get an Evil Dead movie that was kind of like Wreck. Perfect. And it's nothing like that at all. It's not even close to that. It's basically the same concept as a cabin in the woods with limited people, but put in an apartment building that's supposed to be in LA. And yeah, they write plot, story elements that excuse that and try to explain away why that is. But ultimately, it's budgetary constraints, and they couldn't have a high rise with a bunch of people possessed. But unfortunately, that's the movie we should have gotten. I feel like that could have been a far superior film. So without getting into all the things I didn't like about the film, it's a good time for some people to turn your brain off. If you're not a huge fan of the Evil Dead series, I could see you going to theaters. It's a good bloody time, a good R-rated horror film, and there's some chainsaw action in there, and so I could see again a lot of people just turning this on and having a good time. So it's definitely a movie that I'm happy we got this year, and I'm putting it at number 5 for that reason alone. And number 4 on my list is not going to be on a lot of people's lists, I'm sure, but it's the film Boogeyman that came out this year. And I just have to say, I had a good time with this film. I had a good time in theaters. Maybe it's managing expectations versus what we actually get. I didn't expect a lot from this film, and I didn't expect a lot from this director. So I went into the theaters, just wanted to sit back and have a good time, and that's exactly what I got. It's not the best film in the world. It's not going to stick with you. It doesn't have the best scares, but it's got some good jump scares. I feel like they make good use of the concept, and I feel like the director does a good job building up enough tension to carry you through the film so you don't get bored. It felt a lot to me like Smile, but not as good as Smile we got last year. Very similar, where it's a very predictable elements, very predictable story, but told in a way that you can have fun with. And there's, like I said, there's some good scares in there. I found myself, on the edge of my seat in theaters. Again, I didn't take it home with me. I barely remember some of the things that happened in the film, but I remember having a really good time in theaters. And this is one of the movies I'm going to go and rewatch again. And so for me personally, this year, this was one of my best viewing experiences in theaters and my best horror viewing experiences this year. So I got to put it at number 4. If you haven't seen Boogeyman, manage your expectations. Go in and just, it is exactly what you think it's going to be, but maybe a little bit better. So if you manage your expectations, I feel like you can have a good time with this film. Number 3 on my list is actually Scream 6. And again, I feel like I have to really state the reason that this is on my list and at number 3 is because it's Scream. Because Ghostface is in the film, it shoots up. I enjoyed this movie for the most part in theaters, but I'm not a big fan of where Radio Silence is taking the Scream films. I'm a huge Scream fan, and I'm not a big fan of Scream 5, and I'm not a big fan of Scream 6 ultimately either. Again, in theaters, I had a good time with it. I enjoyed it more than I did Scream 5, and so I liked elements they brought to it. I loved the opening scene, and I love seeing Ghostface in the film again. I love seeing a brutal Ghostface. When I went to go watch it a second time at home, all of the issues that I have with Radio Silence as directors and the characters and the actors and the things that the writing and the script just stand out so much more to me. So I have such a hard time having a fun time with this film. If you kind of like want to go in, turn your brain off, and just watch a slasher film, again, it's one of those, I think you could have a great time. If you don't love all the Scream films and you just want to go in and just see Ghostface kill some people, you might have had the best time at the theaters this year watching this film because it is a good time. But if you're actually trying to have a cohesive Ghostface story, some meta humor that actually makes sense, some good characters in there, and see the series continue on and some of the characters that you love carry on in a good way, this is not the film. And so I actually am kind of excited that we got an announcement. There's going to be a new director for Scream 7, but Scream 6 just didn't do it for me. Again, it's at number 3 because there are great elements in there. I like what they did with the costume for Ghostface. I like the setting in New York. I think it was a great idea to move it, change things up, keep it fresh. I love the opening scene. I love what they did with it. They really took it and turned it on its head, and I will watch Scream 6 for the opening multiple times. And some of the kills are really good. I think that they did a much better job with some of the suspense scenes in this film. Some of the chase sequences are much better. The reveal, while I still didn't like it, is better than the last reveal. And, with all the nitpicks aside, I do think that you could have a good time going and watching Scream 6. So, again, it's at number 3 for that reason and that reason alone. Number 2 on my list is Cobweb, which is a really recent watch for me. And I didn't know anything about this movie except for that it took place around Halloween time. So that was enough for it to be a highly anticipated film for me this year. And I'm very excited that I got to see it on VOD pretty recently, even though I didn't get to see it in theaters. I had almost no expectations going into this film, except for I wanted a Halloween time film that I could put in my rotation for Halloween October watches. And that's what I got. And so for that reason alone, it's number 2. And it is a good movie. It's not again, this year, I don't think has been the best for horror films. This is not the best film we've had in decades, but it's a good, solid horror film. It's a fun time. It's a really unique, creepy story. And again, if you're looking for that fall atmosphere in a horror film, you've got it. And so I highly recommend, if you haven't seen Cobweb, just go in, check it out, manage your expectations, but don't watch the trailer and just go in, watch it, and tell me what you think. My number one should be no surprise, but it's Talk to Me. It is easily, far and away, the best horror film that we've had this year. And not just the best horror film we've had this year, but a solid, actually great horror film. Easily probably top 10 that we've had in the last 4 or 5 years. I think that last year's Barbarian could be beat it for me, just because I had such a great time with Barbarian. If you were to talk skill level and quality of film, Talk to Me might outdo it, but I think that just sheer expectations, not knowing what you're getting when you go into Barbarian, the fun time I had with it might take it up a notch. But Talk to Me is not just the best this year. It's actually a solid horror film, and nothing has even come close to it. We have quite a few more releases coming out this October and September, and I'm really, really hoping it'll pad out this year's horror film list, and it won't be just another line of disappointing horror films like Insidious, Red Door. Got some heavy hitters coming up, but I do not see anything outshining Talk to Me. I think it's going to be no surprise come to the end of the year, and this is still going to be up there at the top. So if you haven't seen Talk to Me, it's a really unique, interesting spin on the possession horror concept, and it's created by a couple of YouTubers who turned directors. It's their first feature-length film, and it's absolutely impressive. I do have a review that I just did for it, and again, it's still in theaters right now, so if you have not seen Talk to Me, I highly recommend you have a chance to still go see Talk to Me in theaters right now. Go support them. I highly recommend checking it out. Thanks for watching, everybody. I really appreciate it. Let me know what your lists are in the comments. How do you feel about this year for horror? Has it been better than you expected or worse than you expected? And what about these upcoming horror films in September, October? Do you feel like the trajectory that we've had is going to just line us up for a couple more disappointing horror films? Do you think they're going to pull it out and we're going to get some good ones till we pad out the end of the year? Let me know what you guys think, and thanks for watching, everyone.